Good morning. Father Ralph offered me the opportunity to do the children's sermon, but I confess I chickened out. And I'm glad that he did it because it was well done. It is wonderful to be here with you all at St. Thomas. 1 year ago, today actually, Leslie, my wife, and I attended the 8 o'clock service. We slipped in because it was the first Sunday after I was made the bishop. 1 year ago, on the 26th of April, was the ordination. So it's kind of fun to be back here on that anniversary. Thank you. You're also our neighborhood church. We just live a few blocks away in Neenah, so it's good to be here. I also have a particular fondness for St. Thomas, the saint that the congregation is named, the parish is named after, for more reasons than one, but my ordination to the priesthood was on the feast of St. Thomas, which I'm sure you all know is December 21st. So it's good to be here with you. My wife Leslie is there in the congregation as well, and also excited about St. Thomas because it is such a vibrant, you are such a vibrant community. The ministry of double portion and the youth ministry and other outreach ministries and vibrant worship give you a reputation in the diocese as a very lively congregation. And I'm excited to be your bishop and to be here with you this morning. I want to look a bit at the lessons from this morning, looking at the Gospel and Acts in particular. I want to begin with a little story. There was a man who went to Switzerland on a tour, and part of the tour was to go climbing in the mountains in the Swiss Alps. And he was up in the mountains following the group and enjoying the magnificent scenery, these great landscapes of mountains and sky and valleys. The problem was he got so caught up in the beauty of the landscape that he managed to get himself separated from the rest of the group, which wasn't too much of a problem for a while because he was still just wandering around enjoying the beauty. But then it began to become nighttime, and a deep fog descended upon the mountain, so thick that he could barely see his hand in front of his face. And it was then that he realized that he had been separated from the rest of the group, and he was lost. And by himself, he knew that if he continued to just wander around trying to find his way back to the group or down the mountain by himself, he would be in deep trouble. He could not see clearly enough to negotiate the crags and crevices and cliffs of the mountain that surrounded him, and he didn't know the way. He was stuck, unable to go forward or backwards. He began to cry out, and his voice echoed around the mountains. And eventually he heard some voices calling out, "We're over here, we're over here. Come, follow our voices, we're over here." Well, the man couldn't see at all, so just to start following the voices might have just led him over a cliff. And he began to listen more carefully to the voices, and he was able to discern that some of the voices were something somewhat familiar to him. They were voices of some of the others in the tour group who he knew didn't know their way around the mountain any better than he did. Others had accents that were clearly not Swiss, and he couldn't tell for sure that he could trust that they knew their way around the mountain. And to just follow their instructions or to follow their voice would likely just get him into worse trouble, if not precipitous trouble. And then he heard another voice, a voice that he recognized as the voice of the guide. The accent was a true Swiss accent. And the man knew that the guide knew his way around the mountain, knew every trail and every rock of the mountain. And the man said, I hear your voice and I can tell where you are, and I know exactly where you are, and I know exactly how to get you from where you are to where we are so we can bring you to safety. And the guide began to lead the man along, encouraging him, giving him words of comfort, but also occasionally challenging him and saying, okay, you are coming up to a ledge, and what I need you to do is jump 3 feet forwards, because there's a crevice there and you don't want to fall into it. The man jumped the crevice and landed on firm ground and went a little bit further, and the guide said, now you're going to come to another ledge, and this time I want you to hang from that ledge, and then after you've got your bearings a little bit, let go. I promise you it's only a 10-foot drop, and if you're hanging from the ledge it won't be that far, but you're going to have to trust me. And the man who couldn't see the bottom had to hang from the cliff and let go, trusting that the guide knew his way. And he did. And eventually, listening to the guide's instructions, the man was able to find his way back to the rest of the group and then back to safety. The man who was lost no longer. The man who was in danger no longer. The man who was surrounded by darkness and fog now was surrounded by friends and led by the guide. And so it is with Jesus and the fog and darkness and shadow of death that surround us. He is the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd who calls us and calls us by name, and the one who knows the way, the one who is the way, calls to us and says, if you follow me, I will guide you through the fog and darkness and lead you into the safety and green pasture of my presence. Jesus, in this morning's gospel, declares himself to be the Good Shepherd who will call his sheep, and when his sheep respond, will lead them into all goodness. In Acts, we hear Peter make the seemingly outlandish claim that there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among mortals by which we must be saved. There is no other name. It sounds offensive to our ears, our modern ears, because there are lots of folk who will tell you that it does not matter what name you call on. All names are more or less the same, and all ways are more or less the way to get you to safety. But as the man in the Swiss Alps knew, that is not the case. Not all names are trustworthy, not all ways are good, and not all ways will lead you to safety. It's not a new idea. From the very beginning, there have been folk who have said that it doesn't particularly matter one way or the other if you follow Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad. But Jesus is the Good Shepherd, and there is no other name, and I believe it. Jesus is the one who will guide us to salvation, guide us to transformation, guide us into life. That said, there are a couple things I want to say just to complicate things a bit. From early on, the church has grappled with just what this might mean and what all it might mean and not mean. And many have suggested, and I'm inclined to agree with them, that while we do say emphatically and without apology that Jesus is the way, To say that Jesus is the way does not necessarily mean that everyone else is absolutely wrong, or that there is no truth to be found in other traditions. The Holy Spirit whispers in the hearts of all people. All people. Some are better listeners than others. Sin gets in the way of all of us. But some, even outside the church, have caught hints of what God is about. One of the earliest theologians of the church, a man named Justin Martyr, who died around 150 AD, so just a little over 100 years after Jesus, Justin wrote that because God created the world, the whole world is full of God's fingerprints. Actually, that's not the word he used. What Justin said was that because God had created the world, God had scattered the seed of the word all over the place. He called it, this is the Greek, logos spermaticus, the seed of the word, scattered all over the place. Justin suggested that that seed was everywhere and that people throughout history and time have been able to discern bits of what God's up to. He mostly was talking about the ancient Greeks. Justin had studied Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and those folk, and he believed that he could read them and say, they didn't get it all right, but there are places where you read Socrates and Plato and it sounds not that different from what the church has been teaching and what Jesus was about. So maybe they had heard a little bit, even if they had not gotten the whole story right. Plato, Socrates, or to get them in the right order, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle might not lead you all the way to safety, but you could still learn something from them. That's what Justin believed. Or as Paul says later in Acts, other folk have caught glimpses of God, groping after God. You will recall Paul in Athens talking about the altar to the unknown God, and he allows that maybe some folk have at least got a hint of what God is about, even without Jesus. Paul and Peter and Justin and I would say that might be true, but Jesus is the way. Jesus is the measure and the standard of whatever good or truth there might be in other traditions. All other words, all other ways are measured against the words and way of the one who is the Word and is the way, Jesus, the Good Shepherd. Also, to complicate it a bit more, from the early days of the church, there have been questions about just what exactly it means for those who might not claim Jesus, claim the name. And many have said that it may not necessarily mean that everybody who does not say the name is necessarily going straight to hell in a handbasket. For example, Gregory of Nyssa, 4th century, one of the seminal theologians of the church. Isaac of Nineveh, another important theologian from the 7th century, both suggested that the Good Shepherd never completely gives up on any of us and may still pursue us after death, calling out our names, encouraging us to turn and follow. In the 20th century, which most of us can remember some of, a couple of the most important theologians, Karl Barth, great Protestant theologian, and Hans Urs von Balthasar, great Roman Catholic theologian, and good Anglican C.S. Lewis, all said something similar to what Gregory of Nyssa and Isaac of Nineveh had said, that Jesus, the Good Shepherd, never, and they meant never, wholly gives up on any of us. That doesn't mean the choice to follow or not follow Jesus doesn't matter, but that Jesus will not give up on any of us. If you remember for a moment, this is not one of the lessons that was read this morning, and Episcopalians often try not to preach from other texts, but I didn't grow up Episcopalian. Remember Matthew 25, when Jesus, the Good Shepherd, is judging, and he will judge. And he separates the sheep from the goats. Many of the sheep who are rewarded for serving Jesus, even though they had no idea Jesus was who they were serving. When did we feed you? When did we clothe you? When did we give you something to drink? They didn't even know who Jesus was. And yet Jesus says, whenever you were helping the wretched, the needy, you were helping me. And he counts them as the sheep. The choice does matter. The shepherd will not force any of us into his fold. And following him is the way to salvation. Or whatever salvation there is will only come through him. And whatever that means in terms of ultimate judgment, it is better now to follow the one who has come from the heart of the Father to gather us up into the heart of the Father, rather than to trust ourselves to someone else, to some other voice, to some other way, to some other name. Jesus is the Good Shepherd. Jesus is the key to what life is about. Jesus is the voice to which we should listen. Listen to his voice. Learn his way. Believe, as we read in 1 John, believe in the name of Jesus Christ and love one another. Learn to love one another with the love of Jesus in word and speech and in truth and action. Attend to Jesus and attend to the real needs of those around you. Jesus is the Good Shepherd. Jesus is the way. And the way Jesus is the way into the heart of the Father. He will revive your soul and guide you along right pathways for his name's sake. He will deliver you from the fog and darkness of life and the fog and darkness of death. And if you follow him, surely his goodness and mercy shall follow you all the days of your life, and you will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.